a 100-year prison sentence for a single shooter, decades behind bars for bystanders, a total of 450 years handed down to 8 protesters at a Texas ICE facility. Is this the swift, uncompromising justice needed to dismantle a domestic terrorist cell? Or is the government wielding unprecedented power to criminalize a political ideology?
If you enjoy content like this, please take a moment to like, subscribe, follow, and turn on notifications so you'll always know when new content is released. As a quick update, we continue to monitor the Martin Stevens v. OpenAI matter. It is important to note that this is still not a lawsuit. Martin Stevens has suspended his voluntary quiet period after OpenAI filed its confidential S-1 registration statement on June 8, 2026, without first engaging with him despite having nearly a month since his final notice and more than a year since his initial notifications.
Stevens views OpenAI's decision to proceed without any direct interaction as a sign of extreme disrespect. As a result, he has stated that he will not re-enter a quiet period unless it is part of a formal agreement. At the time of this recording, no settlement discussions or negotiations have been publicly confirmed. We can also report that the dead man switch has not been activated, meaning Martin Stevens remains safe from both a physical and legal standpoint. We will provide updates if circumstances change. Welcome to the debate.
Thank you for having me.
So today we are diving into the events of July 4th, 2025. This is the incident at the Prairieland Detention Center down in Alvarado, Texas.
Right, a case that has basically set the legal world on fire.
Exactly. And, we're specifically looking at the profound legal aftermath. We just saw the sentencing of 8 individuals to a combined 450 years in federal prison, mostly on terrorism-related charges.
It's an astronomical number, 4.5 centuries.
It is. Which brings us to our core question for today. Did the prosecution rightfully convict an organized Antifa domestic terrorist cell that executed a premeditated ambush, or, did a chaotic but fundamentally peaceful demonstration result in overly severe, ideologically driven sentences?
Yeah, and that distinction is everything.
Right, so I will be representing the prosecution's perspective today. I'll be arguing that the evidence presented at trial proves a coordinated, premeditated domestic terror attack, one that, frankly, fully justifies these severe sentences.
And I'll be representing the perspective of the defense, and really the families of the defendants, arguing that these harsh sentences represent collective punishment. From this viewpoint, the government has basically weaponized the justice system to criminalize a political ideology rather than just proportionately punishing individual criminal acts.
Okay, so let's lay down the foundational reality of what actually happened that night. Because if you examine the evidence from the 12-day trial, the events of July 4 were a textbook, premeditated domestic terror attack.
Well, textbook is a strong word.
But I think it applies. The individuals involved didn't just stumble into violence. They operated as a unified militant cell. The prosecution showed they shared encrypted chats to coordinate a literal gear check.
A gear check for a protest, though?
But look at the gear. They arrived in black bloc clothing to conceal their identities. They brought 11 firearms. 11, plus body armor, Faraday bags to block cell phone tracking, and military-grade first aid kits with tourniquets.
I come at it from a different way, honestly. We have to look at the actual intent of the gathering before the situation deteriorated.
Okay.
It was explicitly planned as a late-night noise demonstration. Setting off fireworks to ensure detained immigrants hear support on the outside is it's a known long-standing protest tactic.
Sure, noise demos happen.
Exactly. And the violence that erupted, as horrific as it was the action of a single individual in a highly volatile moment. Yet the prosecution relied on the emotionally charged label of terrorism to apply collective punishment to everyone present.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Bringing a megaphone to a noise demonstration is expected.
Fair.
Bringing 11 rifles, body armor, and military tourniquets while actively disabling your digital footprint, that is the preparation of a paramilitary squad executing an ambush. You don't bring tourniquets unless you are planning for a gunfight.
Wait, let's pause on the idea of disabling a digital footprint and carrying defensive gear. Because using encrypted apps with auto-delete functions like Signal or, utilizing Faraday dags. That is standard practice for modern activists.
Standard practice to carry a Faraday bag?
Yes. They have a well-founded fear of government surveillance and indiscriminate data sweeping. Things like geofence warrants are used all the time now. So to frame basic digital privacy as terrorist operational security is a massive leap.
It's really not a leap when you look at the mechanism of a Faraday bag, though. This isn't just turning off location services on your iPhone. It's just a physical block.
A physical block that stops all electromagnetic fields. It completely kills radio frequency signals. It is an active, aggressive measure to evade law enforcement tracking. And when you couple that with the acquisition of over 50 firearms by the broader group in the Dallas-Fort Worth area prior to the attack, the picture becomes very clear.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the reality of the environment these protesters are operating in? Let's look at the firearms first. This is Texas.
I know it's Texas, but bringing firearms to protest in Texas is not only perfectly legal, it has become incredibly common across the entire political spectrum for self-defense.
Self-defense against who?
Against hostile counter-protesters, or even heavy-handed police tactics. Open carry is often utilized as a deterrent, not as a declaration of war.
A deterrent? Okay, we have testimony from cooperating co-defendants like Susan Kent. She stated under oath that at a gear check the night before, Benjamin Song proposed freeing the detainees.
That was one conversation.
He instructed the group to wear black Bloc and told them to bring rifles specifically because he was not going to be arrested. That is not deterrence. That is planning an insurgency.
And let's look at the explosives the government made such a big deal about to secure that insurgency narrative. Do you know what they were?
They were incendiary devices.
They were fireworks. Literally just fireworks. You need incredibly loud sounds to penetrate the concrete walls of an ICE detention center. Framing commercial fireworks and legally carried firearms as some insurgent armory is a deliberate distortion by the prosecution.
To justify the terrorism enhancements, you mean?
Exactly. They needed it to sound like a war zone before a single shot was even fired.
But that standard privacy and protest argument collapses the exact moment those so-called defensive weapons are actually fired.
Well,
If this was just operational security for a noise demo, how do you explain Benjamin Song's reaction when local police showed up? And remember, these weren't ICE agents. They were local Alvarado police responding to a 911 call about vandalism.
the situation with the local police is exactly where the context of the shooter's mindset becomes critical.
Gross arrived to find protesters throwing those fireworks directly at the facility. They were vandalizing a guard shack, puncturing the tires of a transport van.
It was chaotic, yes.
Very chaotic. And when Gross arrived and began issuing commands to a protester named Nathan Bauman, the audio captures Benjamin Song yelling, "Get to the rifles."
Right.
And then he opens fire, striking Lieutenant Gross in the neck. I mean, this was an unprovoked escalation and the attempted murder of an officer who was just doing his job.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
We cannot look at that moment in a vacuum. We have to look at it through the perspective of Benjamin Song, who, let's remember, is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran.
True.
Song testified about exactly what he saw in that split second. He stated that he saw Lieutenant Gross assume an aggressive firing stance, aiming his weapon at the back of an unarmed fleeing protester.
So his solution is to open fire on the police?
For Song, this wasn't an unprovoked ambush. It was his worst nightmare unfolding in real time. He explicitly cited the recent deaths of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, who were killed in confrontations with law enforcement.
But those were completely different incidents.
In his mind, they were happening again. Song claims he used suppressive fire, which is a military tactic used to pin down an opponent to prevent them from shooting. He did this specifically to stop what he genuinely believed was going to be another instance of police brutality. He believed he was protecting a life.
Suppressive fire? You're using a military battlefield tactic to justify firing 11 rounds at a local Texas cop responding to a noise complaint?
I'm saying that was his training taking over.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the concept of suppressive fire has absolutely zero legal or moral standing in civil society. It just doesn't exist in civilian law.
He was utilizing his training in a high-stress environment where he perceived an imminent lethal threat.
But the law differentiates deeply between self-defense and suppressive fire. Self-defense requires a proportional response to an imminent threat. Suppressive fire is inherently offensive in a civilian context. It is area denial through lethal force.
He wasn't trying to kill the officer, though.
Hitting an officer in the neck with an AR-15 isn't suppressive fire. It is attempted murder. As U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman stated during sentencing, it was by the grace of God that an absolute slaughter didn't occur. The law requires us to look at the objective reality of firing upon police, not the subjective ideological rationalizations of the shooter.
Okay, but even if we entirely reject Song's defense, even if we agree that his actions were criminal, unjustified, and warrant a severe penalty, how does it justify what happened to everyone else?
Because they were part of the group.
This is the core of the injustice. Let's shift our focus to the broader implications of these sentences. We are talking about 50 to 70-year sentences handed down to individuals like Maricela Ruda, Savannah Batten, and Autumn Hill.
Because they were part of an organized cell.
Were they, though? Autumn Hill's attorney pointed out that there was zero evidence she even had a gun. She testified that she thought the event was basically a party. She actually stayed to pick up trash after the fireworks went off.
Ignorance of the broader conspiracy isn't always a defense.
She got 50 years for picking up trash at a protest that turned violent. But the most glaring example of this systemic overreach, the one that truly exposes the legal mechanism at play here, is Daniel Sanchez Estrada. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison.
His involvement was crucial after the fact, though.
Let me ask this directly. How does moving a box of artwork, poetry, zines, and journals from a residence to Denton, Texas, warrant 3 decades in a federal cage?
It wasn't just poetry.
He wasn't at the detention center. He wasn't involved in the shooting. The government utilized the terrifying label of terrorism in President Trump's September 2025 executive order to classify these people as an Antifa cell. They needed a symbol, so they applied collective punishment.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. The prosecution didn't arbitrarily hand out these sentences based on ideology. They secured convictions based on the established legal mechanisms of federal conspiracy and providing material support to terrorists.
But applying those mechanisms to a protest is exactly the problem.
Let's explain how this actually works for a second. In federal conspiracy law, you aren't being sentenced for the box of poetry itself. Once the government links you to a conspiracy, moving that box becomes an overt act and furtherance of terrorism.
So moving a box is terrorism now?
Legally, the getaway driver faces the same liability as the bank robber. According to the evidence, Sanchez Estrada was convicted of corruptly concealing a document or record. That box contained insurrectionary planning documents and anti-law enforcement propaganda.
It was political literature.
It was evidence. He and his wife were convicted of concealing documents that would implicate her in the riot and the shooting. Under the mechanism of Pinkerton liability, when you operate as a collective enterprise and you actively hide the evidence of a violent crime, you are liable for the reasonably foreseeable crimes committed by your co-conspirators.
Even a shooting you weren't present for?
Yes. The sentences reflect the severe, cumulative danger of the group's actions. It is never just about the trigger puller.
To even make that conspiracy connection in the first place. This is where the Trump executive order completely altered the prosecutorial landscape. They brought in an expert to testify that Antifa is a militant enterprise aimed at overthrowing the U.S. government. But Antifa is not an organization.
It operates as one in these tactical scenarios.
It absolutely does not. There's no membership roster, there's no central leadership, no domestic equivalent to the State Department's list of foreign terror organizations. It is an umbrella term for decentralized anti-fascist ideology.
Ideology that led to coordination.
But prosecuting Antifa under federal terror laws or RICO statutes is like trying to sue Anonymous or open source software. There is no CEO, no headquarters. The government is taking a net designed to catch organized hierarchical cartels, and using it to scoop up an entire decentralized political subculture.
Well, the jury found otherwise based on specific actions, not subculture.
By treating it as a formal terrorist network, the Justice Department fundamentally lowers the bar for what constitutes material support. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, if you don't want to go to jail, don't bring a gun to a riot, you have to look at the precedent this sets.
What precedent?
It means that if you're standing next to a stranger who throws a brick, your entire digital history, the political literature you own, and the encrypted messaging acts you use can now be weaponized to frame you as their co-conspirator.
I have to push back on the idea that these were just random strangers scooped up in a dragnet. The jury heard testimony from 46 witnesses, they reviewed over 210 exhibits, they saw the DNA and fingerprint evidence linking these specific defendants to the tactical gear, the firearms, and the explosives left at the scene.
Evidence of being at a protest isn't evidence of planning an attempted murder.
But they did plan. They read the encrypted auto-delete chats where the defendants used monikers, conducted reconnaissance, and explicitly discussed what firearms and medical kits to bring.
Again, typical protest prep in 2025.
We even have evidence that some of the defendants attended a peaceful daytime protest at Prairieland earlier on July 4, specifically to gather intelligence on the facility's security, which they then reported back to the group. That is premeditation. That is intelligence gathering. That is a coordinated cell, regardless of whether they have a CEO or a headquarters.
Benjamin Song said it himself during his sentencing. He said, if you speak, if you protest, if you are associated with the wrong idea, you can be turned into a symbol instead of treated like a human being. That is what happened to Autumn Hill and Daniel Sanchez Estrada.
A civilized society simply cannot tolerate armed militants attacking federal facilities and shooting law enforcement officers under the guise of political protest. The sentences serve as a severe but necessary deterrent.
A deterrent at the cost of basic constitutional rights.
As Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche stated, terrorists who attack law enforcement will face swift and uncompromising justice. The rule of law must stand firm against political violence, and conspiracy laws exist precisely to dismantle the networks that enable that violence.
And while I agree that violence against individuals is unacceptable, we must recognize the profound cost of how this justice is being administered. Locking a young woman away for 50 years because she was present at a protest where a shooting occurred, or sending a man to prison for 30 years for moving boxes of literature after the fact, is a grotesque distortion of due process.
They were convicted by a jury of their peers under established federal law.
Under laws stretched to their absolute limits to serve an executive order. As Autumn Hill's wife said outside the courthouse, the government has chosen to lay to ruin the lives of these defendants and their families just to make a political point.
It's a point about stopping armed assaults.
This case at the Prairieland Detention Center will undoubtedly serve as a defining legal battleground for how the United States handles domestic extremism and protest rights moving forward. If the bar for material support for terrorism is lowered to include attending a rowdy demonstration and sharing anti-establishment zines, we are entering an era where the justice system is effectively weaponized against political opponents.
The tension between maintaining public order and protecting the right to dissent is, well, it's as old as the Republic itself. But when that dissent crosses the line into tactical coordination, intelligence gathering, armed confrontation, and ultimately the pulling of a trigger against law enforcement, the judicial system's response will inevitably be severe. The mechanism of conspiracy law ensures that those who set the stage for violence share the responsibility for its execution.
But when that mechanism is applied so broadly that it sweeps up the getaway driver and the person picking up trash in the exact same net, we have to question if justice is actually being served or if we are simply punishing association. I encourage anyone listening to look into the details of this trial themselves, because the line between dissent and terrorism is being redrawn, and the implications for the First Amendment are chilling.
It leaves us to continuously question where the line is truly drawn between a protected political movement and a militant cell, and how our legal system defines the boundaries of culpability. We'll leave it there for today. If you found this episode valuable, please like, subscribe, share, follow, and turn on notifications. It helps us continue bringing you content like this and ensures you never miss future releases.